These are my best educated guesses on the power levels of these cards in the context of this format. But use these grades as a starting point to then form your own opinions. Okay, part 2, we're on to Primal. The first one on the list for Primal is Mischief Yeti. So it's a 1 cost, 1 Primal Influence 2/1 with Renown, create and draw a Snowball, which is a 1 cost spell that does 1 damage. So I'm really not a fan of 1-drops unless there's a super aggressive deck supported by the limited environment. And even though I think that some Renown decks could be good, you don't want to waste your good interactive fast spells on your 1-drop. Like, what are you going to do in the format? Maybe give it +1/+1? Like, all the buffs you're still probably trading with this unit, and I'd rather just do any of the other Renown effects than this. Playing just a 1 cost 2/1, it's just not a recipe for success, so I'm going to give this a D+. Urge to Feed is the next one. So we got an uncommon spell, 1 cost, 1 Primal Influence, one of your units hunts 1, and you draw a card. So it just replaces itself. I really love this card. You'll see my first draft of the format. We had a few copies of this, and I mean, it performed even better than it looks. It can't be too bad just because 1 cost, draw a card. Even if you had no use for the hunt, it still just replaces itself. The thing is, this hunt lets you fuel your opponent's grave for your Devour cards, and this triggers Renown, which pairs well with some of the Renown effects that can help mill your opponent. So this is a really good way to trigger Renown. Once again, it's 1 cost and it replaces itself, so you aren't wasting a card to target your unit, and it fuels Devour. Since it has so much overlap with different mechanics in the format, it's no less than a C+. I think it's a C+ in an average Primal deck. And if you have any amount of those synergies, like we're talking 3 or more Devour or Renown cards, I think this gets up to like just B-. So C+ for Urge to Feed, but depending on your deck composition, I mean, this could be some of the, best cards in your deck in terms of enabling your synergies. Changey Stick. So this is a weapon. It's a 2 cost, 1 Primal Influence, +1/+1 weapon that gives flying, and it has Spellcraft 5, so you can pay an additional 5 to play Polymorph, which transforms a unit into a 1/1. So it does have situational removal. Mostly situational in the sense of it costs 7, which is really expensive. That being said, I've noticed in this format it's really important to have flying defenders to block all the Nomad units running around, and if you can stick this on something with a decent amount of health, then it can threaten blocks on all those Nomad units. I think this is actually better than my first take on it. At first I was valuing this at like D+. I think this might just be a C+, given how important it is to have flying in this set. That being said, it comes with all the same caveats. You put this on a unit and your opponent kills it, you just get 2 for 1. So definitely downsides to this. You want other ways to protect against Nomad, but this is like C+ range. I'll stake a claim on C, but I could see if having flying so important that this is a C+. So C for Changey Stick. Kasul Huntsman. So 2 cost, 1 Primal Influence, 1/3, and it has Renown and it gets Killer. Like, the joke is you use a pump spell on this, and then it has increased stats to kill an opponent's unit, or you play a weapon on it, it does the same. But on its own, a 2 cost, 1/3 in a set with so much evasive units, or just snowbally units that can stun something and the units keep growing, I think this is a playable you could find in your deck if you happen to have a few ways of enabling this killer. Like if you do have a Myrmidon Helm or Stalwart Shield, some type of pump spell, you could play one of these and not be too upset. But man, that's like a C minus for Kusul Huntsman. But at least it has 3 health, 1 power, it can block. C minus for it, not very impressive. Striking Sparrow, 2 cost, 1 primal influence, 2/1 flyer. Devour 7 plus 3 plus 3. Now, y'all would think that 7, that's like a ridiculous amount. That's not going to happen till way later in the game, but that's exactly why this is still good. Early on, it's a 2 cost, 2 powered flyer, which can really pressure your opponent. Or later in the game, you draw it, and if they have Devour 7, which if it's gone later in the game is likely, then it's a 5/4 flyer, which is just ridiculous. Even if this is your only Devour card, later in the game, I mean, your opponent will get to 7 cards in the void. So any Primal deck, I think this is a C+, just for being an evasive threat. I mean, I could even... we won't go B range, just because 7 is a large amount. But there's going to be tons of games who draw this off the top, and instead of being like most 2-drops and being like, this doesn't do anything, it's going to be a 5/4 flyer. C+ for Striking Sparrow. I mean, it doesn't get cut from any Primal deck. Forked Lightning. So we got a fast spell, 3 cost, 1 primal influence. Deal 2 damage to 2 attacking enemy units. Because there's so much evasive units in the set, and Nomad doesn't give this stat buff to units when they're going to be attacking you in the air, I found this to actually be really good. And early on in the format, people aren't going to be playing around this as much, but I've already gained advantage from, okay, my opponent has 3 up in a primal, they have tons of cards in hand, why would they do that? And I was able to sniff this out and play around it. Early on, this card is going to be much better because, once again, people aren't sure about it, but as the format goes on, this will get worse. Right now, C+, I don't think this gets cut from any Primal decks, but this will get a lot worse as the format goes on and your opponent plays around it more. Glacier Shaper, 3 cost, 2/4, 1 primal influence. Renown, play a glacial monstrosity with power and health equal to the cost of that weapon, of that spell or weapon, and overwhelm. So this is very similar to those Renown uncommons in Justice that get a better payoff depending on the cost of the spell, and I think the same caveats apply. That being said, the 4 cost 3/3, I'm much happier with the 3 cost 2/4 body than the 4 cost 3/3. So I think this starts higher at a baseline stat, and once again, if you can enable it with like a Myrmidon Helm, this is a pretty good benefit. This is another one where it's like baseline C+, but you do have to put some work to make this good. You want to get like a 2/2 at minimum, preferably like 3/3 and higher with this, assuming your deck's built around that and you don't have just a bunch of, where was the card, Urge to Feeds. I think that this is like B- territory. Say you have like Tandem Strikes in your deck, and then you're getting a 4/4 with Overwhelm. So C+ B- for Glacier Shaper. Hey, this card pairs nicely with it. Play a copy of one of your units. 3 cost, 1 primal influence. I have trouble with cards like this. They tend not to work out as well for me, but that's just, anecdotal bias. I think this card is really good. Would you cut this from a primal deck? Does this draw you into that faction? I would say yes. Given the synergies, I would say Mirror Image, I would give it a B-. But it does have all the downsides of, if you're on the back foot and you're just trading off units or don't have anything strong yet, you have some awkward draws, then this is just going to sit in your hand or only be able to copy a 2-drop. you obviously want to copy like one of your stronger units with this. So just keep those caveats in mind. There's downside to mirror image. Ambitious Kit. 4 costs 1/2, 1 primal influence. Summon Hunt 2. Not a great card. I mean, the idea is it fuels your Devour by milling your opponent for 2, but man, this is just really understated. This is like D+. Like, it does help enable your Devour, but it's just going to be understated. It's not going to help you stabilize the board. D+ is as good as the Ambitious Kit will get. Cliffside Caretaker. A 5 cost 2/4, 1 primal influence. Inspire units you draw get flying. Not impressive stats. I mean, we saw a 3 drop with these same stats. That being said, a 2/4 does block well. And all the units you draw getting flying is like really impactful. And I've noticed this is basically a kill on sight unit when it gets played. This is better in a deck that has a lot of larger units. If you just have a bunch of, you're more of an aggressive deck, I wouldn't want this in. But any type of mid-range to control deck, I think this can put in some good work. It's funny, I mean, I guess that's like a C, because a C+ I would define as doesn't get cut from any deck of that color, but I could imagine Primal lists where you wouldn't want this. And the build around just being you aren't in an aggressive deck, then I would say C+. You would never want to cut this from your deck. It's performed really well for me. Duskwing Servitor. I love this card. 5 cost 5/5. This is an uncommon. It's 2 primal influence. Devour 3 flying. So just baseline 5 cost 5/5, which is actually pretty big. And the upside of Devour 3 flying, and likely by turn 5, it's going to be a 5 cost 5/5 flyer, which is just, you know, that's rare level stats. This thing's a B. Even tempted to be B+. Not that much removal deals with it. Almost nothing's big enough in the air to deal with it. This thing's just been a house. I mean, maybe it is just a B+. We're talking a 5 cost 5/5 flyer the majority of the time. And the floor is a 5 cost 5/5. We're going B+ on the Duskwing Servitor. Screw it. I'm let my bias win here, but this card's fantastic. Ferocity of the Bear is next. It's an uncommon 5 cost 1 influence spell. Give 2 of your units killer. These are already situational removal spells because it requires you to already have a unit that's big enough that it can successfully fight another unit. And this is requiring you to have 2 units that you want to give killer. And it costs 5. Man, you're just asking to be blown out. Like, your opponent has removal in response or just any type of interaction. And I get the idea is it also triggers Renown, but I just don't like removal like this. This is just too expensive for a situational effect. So I'm going to give this a straight D. I really don't think this card is going to put in work. Psionic Savant. This was just in Unleashed, reprinting it already. 5 cost 1/1, 1 primal influence flyer. When you draw a card, it gets +1/+1. I've always had a mixed bag of experiences with this card, but especially with early on, this format seemed more on the assertive side than not. And you want your 5-drop to come down and start blocking all of the 2-cost Nomad units pecking you in the air. And this just isn't going to do that for a few turns. And the fact that Aerial Suppression, I can never say that card name. Aerial Suppression exists in the format. You play this, your opponent kills it for 1 on something you spent 5 on. I'm going to go D+. Assuming you're a very good control deck and you can stall out the board and just have this grow, but even, I would just rather have the Duskwing Servitor in all of those scenarios. So D+ for Psionic Savant. Okay, my bad. I just noticed I didn't have crafting on, so there are cards I didn't cover in Primal. So we have Haven Lookout. It's a 1-cost 1/1, 1 Primal Influence. When a player discards a card, Haven Lookout gets +1/+1 this turn. F. Don't play 1-cost 1/1s. Like, what's even the synergy? That you're enabling Devour and making this into a 2/2 temporarily? No, don't play this card in limited games. Take my word for it. This is an F. We don't play those weak cards. Now we're on to a 2-drop, 2-cost 2/2, 1 Primal Influence. It's an uncommon, Renown, +1/+1. If that spell or weapon costs 3 or more, draw a card. This is a really strong Renown effect that does care for the cost of the thing targeting it. I think similar to the other ones, when you're drafting these cards and playing them, you want to also make sure you can enable them well. And this payoff is really good. A permanent Renown buff on top of whatever you're giving it and just replacing itself. I like Devoted Ranger at B-. I think this is a strong draw to Primal, and it doesn't need that much enabling to be good. There's enough okay spells or weapons that cost 3 or more that let the spell just cantrip, replace itself, and giving a little buff. Yeah, Devoted Ranger is great. So you have a common here, 2-cost, 1 Primal Influence, Skybolt. Deal 3 damage to an enemy unit with flying, or give one of your units plus health and flying this turn. This really helps you deal with nomad units. I mean, that's some pretty efficient removal, and then it has some like obscure upside. It can trigger Renown and can ambush something in the air. But hey, another mode on a card only makes it better, even if you use the other one 90% of the time. I think this is just a B-. It's situational removal, but this is going to kill a lot in the format. Onto a 3-drop unit. It's a common, 0/4, flyer. Ultimate, pay 3 to recruit. Now, this does answer nomad units, which I said is very important in the format, but not having any power, it can replace itself later in the game with a recruit. This is probably the one recruit card that I'm just not into. I'm gonna give it a C-, and like maybe recruit just makes anything to be decent, so it should be a C, but I feel there are just better cards that you can put in your deck than this, especially at 3. Skullhaven Patrol is the next 3-drop. 1 Primal Influence, 2/1 common, flyer, Renown, +4 health. So this is another strong aggressive card. It'll really help pressure your opponent, being a 2-powered flyer in the air. And since it just naturally has flying, it can still threaten blocks on your opponent's nomad units. The Renown helps you. If you target it with anything, it's surviving that combat. I really like this card. C+, you're never cutting this from any Primal deck. Next we have Voltaic Viper, a common, 3-cost, 1 Primal Influence, 3/1, Devour 2, draw a card. This is a tough one for me to rate. I really like Devour 2, draw a card. You're using the Devour resource to replace itself, but the 3/1 stats for something that costs 3 power is just so fragile. This can die to 2 different 1 damage things in the format. There are relic weapons that just have 1 power. I'm gonna go with C for Voltaic Viper. I could see this just not making the final list because it's just like a mediocre body, but Devour 2, draw a card, I mean, that's a good effect. Kinda just makes it a decent card regardless. C for Voltaic Viper. A 4-cost fast spell, uncommon, 1 Primal Influence. One of your units deals its power and damage to an enemy unit or site. Now, or I guess this was also like Jotun Smash or whatever in Cold Hunt, but this is much better because it's cheaper and fast spell speed. This has all the same caveats as all of the killer spells. It does require you to have a strong unit in the first place, but since this one, your unit's not taking damage back, I think this is just actively really good. And it's a fast spell, so you can blow out your opponent by, If you have the power up, they go for a combat trick or some type of double block. You use this in response and really blow them out. So B- for Called Shot. Great card. Determined Youth is the next common. 4 cost, 1 primal influence, 3/4. Spellcraft 1 jump kick, which give a unit +1/+1 in flying this turn. This is meant to be a renown enabler, and I think it's a fine one. The stats are actually decent. Like a 3/4 does battle in combat well. That 4 health makes a lot of difference, and that's a really cheap way of enabling your renown. So I'm actually tempted to give this like a C+ in your renown decks. I don't know. I think just C+ straight up. This also has the benefit of jumping one of your units and they finish off your opponent in the air in one big hit. Yeah, C+ for Determined Youth. Grove Defenses. Grove Defenses. 4 cost, 1 primal influence spell. Stun 2 units, recruit. I mean, this is amazing. This helps you gain tempo. You get to stun 2 things, and this potentially just adds to your board via recruit or helps you draw the next unit that you're going to play on your following turn. Can I give this less than a B? We'll say B- for this. I think this is amazing. This is on par with Tandem Strike. I think this is a little better just because stunning 2 things is a huge tempo boost for you and can help you turn the tides of a game in your favor. But Tandem Strike has the benefits of helping your Devour synergies, and I do think Tandem Strike's even better than the rating I gave it in the previous video. That being said, B- or B to B for Grove Defenses. This card's amazing. A great draw into Primal. Hawk Feather Bow. Another uncommon, 4 cost, 1 primal influence, +2/+1 versatile relic weapon. Summon, the wielder deals 1 damage to an enemy. So we see another thing that punishes 1 health. I actually really like this. You get the same benefits of being able to finish off a unit that's damaged in combat, sniping 1 health units. This targets your things that you want more expensive renown, and this is the type of thing you want. Wow, I really like Hawk Feather Bow. C+, and if you have any sort of, 3 or more renown cards, especially the ones that care about being more expensive, then this is like B- level. Really strong card. I'm a fan of Hawk Feather Bow. Daring Pathcutter. So a 5 cost common unit, 1 primal influence. It's a 4/3 with Overwhelm, Renown, draw a card, and you gain Aegis. So this is like the bread and butter synergy effect to add to one of your set mechanics is draw a card. Now the issue is Renown is not repeatable, and this is really understated if you can't enable it. The benefit here, like the joke is if you put a weapon on it, you don't just get blown out in a 2-for-1 because it gains an Aegis. And I actually do think that's pretty good. But I don't think Daring Pathcutter draws you into a Renown deck. It's if you already have one brewing, that turns this into a C+ level card. So if you don't have lots of ways to trigger this Renown, in an average Primal deck, I would give this a D+. In a decent Renown deck with lots of ways to trigger this, I would actually give this a C+. I don't think you cut this card from a Renown heavy deck. Okay, 6 cost uncommon unit. 2 primal influence for a 3/3. So inspire units you draw get Overwhelm. Summon recruit. Okay, wow, that was like a roller coaster. Units you draw get Overwhelm isn't that impactful because it doesn't help you in combat at all. The big kicker for this card is it's just a big smoke shaper. Automatically makes this card really good. Stirring Leader B. I mean, this is gonna, the majority of the time, put a unit into play. Great card. Carnivorous Beaver. So a 7 cost, 2 Primal Influence uncommon, 4/4. With Killer, Devour 5, it gets +4/+4. So 7 is expensive. Like, you're starting to get to the, will you even get to play this in a game? That being said, Primal has a lot of Hunt, which can give you an advantage to help ramp you to there from 6. And if you have the Devour, this is just eating a unit, and then you have an 8/8. Probably baseline as a 7-cost 4/4, being able to kill a 3/3 on summon is still really strong. I really like this card, even though it's 7 cost. I'm going to give the Beaver a B-, but you do have to build your deck with respect that you have a 7-cost card in your deck. You can't be super aggressive. You can't be low on sigils. Have those things in mind if you're putting the Beaver in your deck. Okay, we're moving on to Shadow. Ghost form. It's an uncommon spell. 1 cost, 1 Shadow influence. Give a unit lifesteal and unblockable this turn. I actually don't mind this as a one-off way of triggering Bolster. I think it's on the weaker side, but you could do worse than this. This has an upside of you have your opponent low, you put this on a 5/5, and you can just sneak out a game you had no business of winning. It can swing a race in the right direction. That being said, if you don't have any of the bolster synergies going on, I don't think you should put this in your deck. With those caveats, C-. It's just a nice cheap way of enabling a bolster with other potential upsides. And then we're talking like D- in just an average Shadow deck. So it's still not high, but could see some play. Spite Feeder. 1 cost, 1/1, 1 Shadow influence. Flying. The player of your choice discards a top 2. Obviously, you choose your opponent, and it helps fuel Devour. I think if you are full-on Devour synergies, I think you can play this to enable that. You're really turning your deck into a glass cannon because this just doesn't do much on the board besides that. Outside of a heavy Devour deck, so that's even assuming you have some Devour going on, I think this is like a D. Like, it can make it into the deck and you won't be too unhappy with it. If you're Devour heavy, I think you could actually play this in multiples, and it's actually like C-level enabler of that. Just 1 cost to mill the 2 is pretty decent, and it can block 2/1 flyers. Annihilate. Uncommon, 2 cost, 1 Shadow influence. Kill a unit with a single faction. Fast spell speed, 2 cost removal. Now this is a reprint. It's funny they put it here because this removal spell is amazing. Super efficient to kill any unit regardless of how big it is. But the caveat to that, and that's why they put it in here, is since it's unit with a single faction, Battle Lines is a 3-faction set, there's lots more multi-faction units in this format than a normal format. So this is noticeably worse given that. There's still plenty of single faction units you got to deal with, and this is super efficient. So straight efficiency B for Annihilate. Just keep in mind there's going to be a lot of strong multi-faction units that Annihilate still can't deal with. Devour. A reprint here. 2 cost, 1 Shadow influence fast spell. Sack a unit to draw 2 and gain 2. Trigger your bolster, evade some removal by sacking your unit in response. I think this has enough good synergies and just has enough versatility to it in terms of how you can use it. I'm going to give Devour, I'm going to give it a C. I mean, I think this is just a fine playable, and if you are more Devour centric, this is more like a C+. I actually like this better in terms of lots of the other one-off bolster enablers. C++ for Devour. Fang Trap, a 2 cost Shadow influence, 1 Shadow influence curse. The curse unit has -1/-1 bolster. It increases that ability by -2/-2. More often than not, you'll probably just kill the thing. I think this is okay removal in your Shadow decks. You really need some amount, like, you really want like 3+ ways of triggering bolster. to make this decent. But if that's the case, I actually like Fang Trap as a C+. And I think if you have no ways of triggering Bolster, it's an F. You just can't play cards like this. I guess build around C+ for Fang Trap. We get another 2-cost common, 1 Shadow Influence 1/1, with Lifesteal, Renown, play Cowardice on an enemy unit. I don't like it. The idea is you can target it with Renown, make something not able to block, and then you can get in for your Lifesteal, which will trigger your Bolster. But then your next turn, your opponent just plays another unit, and this can't do anything. Once again, I don't like 1/1s in limited, and this doesn't have enough synergies going on to change that rule. I mean, I guess it can trigger Bolster, so D- for Infamous Hunter or Huntress. You don't want cards like that in your deck. You want your cards to be impactful and limited. That's like a huge core principle of drafting a good limited deck is don't play bad cards. It sounds stupid, but that's if you try to use that large big picture policy, you'll become a better limited player. Lurking Widow, common, 2-cost, 1 Shadow Influence, 3/1. Summon the enemy player discards the top spell from their deck. So it enables Devour. I think this has all the same downsides as the Voltaic Viper. Milling 1 isn't like a huge bonus. Like I think I would rather just have Slinking Roach than this. But they're roughly comparable to each other. I think Lurking Widow's like a D+. This will some amount of time make it into your deck, but you really don't want lots of copies of cards like this. Putrefying Presence, 2-cost, 1 Shadow Influence fast spell. Give a unit +1/+1 and deadly this turn. So, triggers Renown. It can let any unit trade for a massive unit, but you do 2 for 1 yourself in the process, unless the Renown gets there. I think this is kind of in the same boat as Quick Draw, the earlier 2-cost fast spell, or what's it called? Rapid Shot, excuse me. I think these are both, they do slightly different things. They're better in slightly different situations, but they have all the same caveats and downsides. Putrefying Presence is like the same thing. C-, maybe the existence of the other just means neither of them are a big... You don't need to invest a large pick into it. So, Rapid Shot, 2-cost, 1 Shadow Influence fast spell. Give a unit +4 power and Quick Draw this turn. I'm really unsure about this card. I mean, it can definitely help you win a combat. It triggers Renown. It can just deal 4 to face to help you end the game. I guess with all the Renown, this does what it needs to do and trades with the unit. I'm going to give this a C-. Ruthless Officer, 2-cost, 2/2, 1 Shadow Influence. It has Spellcraft 2 to play Threaten, which just gives one of your units a permanent +2 power. I mean, this is like the definition of a C. It's a 2-cost, 2/2 with minor upside. To note that Spellcraft and Threaten can enable Renown, but I still just think this is an okay 2-drop. This is what the majority of your limited decks are going to be built from. Vizier's Tablet, so a 2-cost, 1 Shadow Influence Relic. Pay 3 to make an enemy player discard the top card of their deck. If it was a unit, you gain 1 life. The joke being, it fuels Devour and Bolster. This is so slow in terms of fueling Devour, and it doesn't even always trigger your Bolster, and you're paying 3. That's like a ginormous portion of your power. So because of that, it's trying to do multiple things at once, and there are some relic synergies, but it just doesn't do anything well. Like, you're gonna lose games wasting tempo spinning your wheel with this card. I would say D minus. Like, I think the majority of times, majority of decks, this is just gonna make your deck actively worse. Rift Siphon is the next card. So we have an uncommon Cursed Relic, 2 cost, 1 Shadow Influence. When a unit hits the cursed player, it hunts 1. Really snowbally effect to add to what's felt like a pretty snowbally set in terms of gameplay. Man, this is another low floor, high ceiling card. There are just games where you're behind or you just don't have any good attacks, which happens all the time, and it just sits there not doing anything. And then there are games where you get an early evasive threat and it's just hunting once a turn. This is a card I need to play with in the context of this format to get a good gauge on. I'm actually gonna go out on a limb here and say this is pretty good. And the reason why I like this snowbally, low floor, high ceiling relic versus some of the other similar relics we've seen is it costs 2. The difference between 2, 3, and 4 is just ginormous in a card that doesn't help you advance the game plan. Like, you could still pay 2 and do something else that turn. So I'm going to give Rift Siphon, I'm going to give it a C+. I think this is potentially a strong card. But I could also see it just being, there are just still too many percentages of games where it just doesn't do enough. An uncommon unit here, 2 cost, 1 Shadow Influence, 2/1. Quick Draw Bolster, deal 3 to the enemy player. Oh man, this has been a brutal card, especially if you've seen my last draft. This card's great, really efficiently statted. The 1 health does make it fragile, but the quick draw does help that in combat. This doesn't get cut from any shadow deck, and if you have any sort of bolster, this goes up a ton. Like, we're talking like B-. And then in any shadow deck, like an average shadow deck, C+ for Steel Warren Assassin. This is definitely like the 2-drop you want to play versus like Ruthless Officer. Canny Hunter. So we have an uncommon, 3 costs, 2 Shadow Influence, 3/3. With Ambush, renown your units, get +1/+1. So the joke is you leave up all your power, your opponent attacks with a few things, you ambush this in, and happen to have another fast spell that you also happen to have enough power to activate on the Canny Hunter, boosting your team, and then you can make some advantageous blocks. I'm not buying that. Like, most of the time, your best case with this is you ambush it in and eat a 2/2, which is fine, but I'm not impressed with a card that requires 2 Shadow Influence in a 3-faction set. Like, you aren't going to reliably get to that until later in the game. Because of that, I'm really not a fan of Canny Hunter. I think this is a C just because there is some power level to it. The caveat being, if you are in a dual faction pairing, or maybe you just have a light splash for the 3rd faction and Shadow's one of your main factions, then this goes up to a C+, just on the basis of, like I said, just ambushing it in and eating a 2-power unit. But outside of that, C for Canny Hunter, and I mean, I'm almost like feeling C-, but I'll give it a C since it does have some upside to it. Frontier Scout. Common, 3 cost, 1 Shadow Influence for a 2/2 flyer. Has Renown, the enemy player discards the top 5 cards of their deck. So I drastically underestimated this in one of my, maybe it was a draft, maybe it was the Keywords and Mechanics video. My thought was you wouldn't have lots of Renown enablers outside of the Renown deck, So the idea is you use cards like Urge to Feed. The 1-cost spell replaces itself, makes this hunt, because that's also enabling your fueling of the Devour mechanic, but it's a cheap and replaces itself way of enabling Renown. And there's still cards like Tandem Strike. There's lots of other utility ways to trigger Renown outside of just like being an aggressive combat trick that I didn't account for originally. And because of that, I think this is actually like a C plus for the Devour deck. The caveat being you do need to make sure you have a certain amount of enablers for the Renown, but I don't know, even on its own, 3-cost 2/2 flyer helps threaten blocks on all the various Nomad and small flyers in the set, so C plus for Frontier Scout. Generosity. We have an uncommon fast spell, 3-cost 2 Shadow Influence. Give one of your units +3/+2 this turn. If it has a Renown ability, play that ability an additional time. Oh my god, imagine this on the uncommon 2/2 that draws a card and gets +1/+1 if the thing costs 3 or more. This is really impressive. The issue I have with it is that 3 is starting to get on the expensive side, but the fact that it costs more also helps a lot of the various Renown effects that care about the cost of Renown. And this copying that is just busted. So I actually think I'm going to give this a build around grade. You want to make sure you have the good Renown units first, and then you pick Generosity up later. I wouldn't want to get this and then you have only one good Renown effect that you would want to enable. I just think that's a recipe for disaster. You would rather have like cheaper, easier to cast Renown effects if that was the case. You want to make sure you have the Renown effects that scale with the cost of the spell first, and then pick up Generosity after. So build around, I mean, that's really strong. Build around B- in that deck. And outside of that, you probably don't want this. Let's see, out in an average Shadow deck, like a D, because it's an expensive and hard to cast, being double Shadow Influence spell without all that upside. But build around B- for Generosity. Noxious Venom, 3-cost 1 Shadow Influence spell. Lifesteal, deal 3 damage to the enemy player. They discard the top 3 cards of their deck. We see a Bolster and a Devour enabler. That being said, this doesn't affect the board and it costs 3, so we're getting to the range of meaningful tempo loss for you, spending a whole card and your turn 3 power just to trigger those synergies. Like, there are just better ways to do this. I really don't think you should be stretching your deck to play cards like this. So D for Noxious Venom. Psionic Blast is our next card. Uncommon fast spell. 3-cost, 1 Shadow Influence. Lifesteal, deal 2 damage. Fast spell removal, and it does have bolster synergies. I actually really like this, even though we see Aerial Suppression does this for 2 less, which is huge. But the lifesteal does really matter, giving you some tempo back and triggering bolster. So I think this is still a B-. I think you're going to pick this over lots of strong cards that you wouldn't cut from this faction, even if it is a little bit overcosted. 3-cost 2/2 uncommon, 1 Shadow Influence. Renown, give an enemy unit minus power minus health equal to the cost of that spell or weapon. Once again, I mean, this paired with Generosity, you kind of see these are the type of Renown effects you want to pair with that card. That being said, I'm noticing a lot of the good scaling Renown effects are in the uncommon. We've seen the Glacial Shaper in Primal, we see this one, and there are the 2 in Justice, so that is something to keep in mind. But there are a lot of them, and you only need to pick up 1 Generosity to trigger it. So this is definitely a build around. You need to be able to trigger the Renown, otherwise it's just a 3-cost 2/2. In the deck, especially because you could shrink something to make it irrelevant, build around B-. Need to put in some work to actively make this good, which does drag it down a bit. Okay, Xenon Destroyer. 3-cost 3/3, 1 Shadow Influence, Lifesteal, and Reckless. The joke being, it's slightly overstated for Shadow and having Lifesteal, but it has the downside of Reckless. I hate cards with Reckless, even though there are boards where this is stupid if you play this on turn 3 on the play and your opponent doesn't have blocks. But I want better ways of enabling Bolster than this. And maybe this is just my bias against Reckless, but D+ for Xenon Destroyer? Not a card you want in your Shadow decks. Stalker Spear. So 4-cost, 2 Shadow Influence Relic Weapon that gives +2/+2, has Versatile, Devour 4, +2/+2 additionally, for a total of +4/+4. That's really strong. Devour 4 is getting towards the expensive. I think Devour 3 and under is like pretty trivial to get to. 4 is starting to get... You aren't always going to have this, especially if you're devouring elsewhere. Seeing as this is a relic weapon, though, and a versatile one, I think this is more so for the Renown deck, in which case this is likely to be one of the few Devour cards you have. So you don't really need to enable this. You'll just draw this at some point in the game when your opponent has 4 cards in grave, and then it's inexpensive, a more expensive Renown target for all the uncommon Renown enablers that we've been talking about, or just a strong removal spell. And it can trigger Bolster if you use it as a relic weapon. It fills a lot of shoes, and even if it's a 4-cost 2/2 versatile, like, I mean, we've played Myrmidon Helm before. I really like this, actually. I think it does enough for most decks that I'm willing to give this a B-. It's not like a B- in all of the scenarios, but it just does all of them well. When you make a pick on this card, it's likely to play a strong role in whichever synergy route you go for. So B- for Stalker Spear. Warren Enforcer is a common, 4-cost, 1 Shadow Influence 3/3. Bolster +1/+1 permanently. Meh. It's just 4-cost 3/3 is just not good stats, and you need to put in work to just make this a 4-cost 4/4, which you need to trigger this once to be happy with the card, and you aren't even necessarily doing that the next turn. And if, God forbid, you don't have any ways of triggering Bolster, I'm just really not a fan of Warren Enforcer. D? It's a D level card. Yeah, 4-cost 3/3, D. Ravenous Tusker. 5-cost 4/4, 2 Shadow Influence, Devour 3, Lifesteal. Solid unit for the Devour decks. 4/4 is just big enough stats to make a difference. Lifesteal can help trigger your Bolster effects. Helps you just, stay alive in games when you can start attacking back. I really like this card. So I'm going to give it a C+, but I could see you only have so much room for 5 drops, and I could see this being one that just gets the axe. But I'm going to go with C+, just because Lifesteal on a unit this large is pretty strong, and I think it's on the better side of 5 drops. C+ for Ravenous Tusker. Sadistic Glee is a reprint, uncommon, 6-cost, 1 Shadow Influence for a 5/5. Summon the enemy player discards the top 2 cards from their deck for each of your units. So this mills them for a ton. Definitely a synergy card for the Devour decks, but a really strong one in that deck. If you don't have Devour synergies, then it's just a 6-cost 5/5, and then it's like a D for just being an understated, essentially vanilla unit. In the Devour deck, I actually like this as a B-. Really strong enabler for your Devour cards. Terror Claw, what is that artwork? An uncommon 6-cost 6/4, 2 Shadow Influence. Devour 4, the enemy player discards 2 cards of their choice from their hand, and that fuels the next Devour. Oh man, I like this card. Is a little bit fragile, but 4 is still relevant. This is on like the C+, B- range for me. The real question with this card is this draft format going to be more about who's winning in card advantage or board control and racing situations? Because I could see this just being too slow. Your opponent's emptied all of their Nomad or Renown units already onto the field, and they just kill you by the time this is relevant. They don't even have 2 cards to discard. A 6/4 doesn't block anything in the air. So because of those downsides, and I'm still unsure about the vibes of this format, I'm going to give it a C+, but I would not be surprised if this is more a B-. Cunning Plan. Ugh, I already don't like it. 7 cost, 2 Shadow Influence, fast spell. Kill an enemy unit, you may sack a unit to draw 2. The joke is this does replace itself, and you can use it to sack something that was going to die to removal anyways, but it costs 7. It's just when you get to 7+ cards in draft, you're just not always going to get there. And you might not even want to sack a unit to draw 2. Like, if I'm playing something on 7, I want this to say, like, kill 2 enemy units. I'd rather have something that stabilizes me extra than nets me some card advantage. Like, this has already been sitting in my hand for how many turns? Yeah, I think this is just too expensive. In a board stall, okay, obviously it's great. It kills our most important thing, and you draw 2, and you basically always win that game. I think it's too expensive. I'm going to go D+. Like, it definitely has power level to it. I can't give it lower than that, but I just think you lose the game with this in your hand a large percentage of games. Unless this format just is way slower than it's felt. The multi-faction cards. Usually multi-faction sets are built in a way that the power level comes from the multi-faction cards, and the mono-faction cards tend to not be as powerful on average. That way it incentivizes you to go into multi-factions. So we should see a lot of strong cards in this section of the set review. So let's take a look. Our first one, Caleb's Cloak, is a 2-cost Praxis Relic. When you play a unit, sack Caleb's Cloak to make that unit recruit. So one thing I should mention is, as we know, Battle Lines is made up of 5 different 3-color factions, and 1 dual faction as the primary core, I guess, of that alliance. So we have the 5 tri-factions in the set, and then we have a cycle of 5 different dual faction pairs. So we see Praxis is one of them, Skycrag is one of them, Combray is one of them, that's 3, Argenport is the 4th, and then finally we have Feln as the 5th. And the other 5 dual faction combinations are not present in the set outside of rare and legendary. Something to keep in mind while drafting the set. That will drastically inform how you stay open and the different factions you pick. Because if you start off Praxis, you could either be in the Grove Alliance, which is Primal, or you can also be in the Hive Caravan, which is Justice. And you can see me apply that same drafting strategy in my last draft video, which I'll have tagged up in the corner there for you to see. It's a really, really important draft strategy for this set that you can take and help increase your win rate in the draft queues. That being said, getting back to Caleb's Cloak. When you play a unit, sack Caleb's Cloak to make that unit recruit. Now, I was really excited when I saw this card, but you're spending a card to get the recruit, and the whole benefit of recruit is it being a 2-for-1. Recruit's already present on a unit or spell, and you're getting something extra. In this case, the relic doesn't do anything. It does replace itself with recruit, which is okay. There are various relic synergies and relic leaving the field for that one uncommon bird. Besides some like fringe case synergies with relics being present or leaving the battlefield, I'm actually not a huge fan of spinning your wheels like this. This might actually just be fine enough. I think I'm going to give this a C-. It can't be that bad because it does just replace itself with whatever the next unit you play is. And the idea is it does benefit you more if you play this later in the game and then you play a 6-cost unit, you get something bigger, but it's still basically just functioning as a cantrip, as a card that replaces itself. So C- for Caleb's Cloak. Next Praxis card, 2-cost uncommon fast spell. Kill an enemy attachment with cost 3 or less, and or play an attachment with cost 3 or less from your void. We see some more relic synergies. This synergizes with Caleb's Cloak, for example. This is a tough card. I'm actually really not, this really isn't that impactful. If your enemy has a big weapon you need to kill or some strong relic, it probably costs more than 3. I would give this a D+, and if you have synergies like Caleb's Cloak, it could get better than that. I really want my cards to impact the board, and that's not really impacting the board in an impressive way. So you have Caravan Overseer next. It's a common, 3-cost 3/3 Praxis. Ultimate at the start of the turn, units you play get charge. So it helps you be more aggressive. Another okay unit. This is kind of flying in the face of what I said about a lot of the power level being in the dual faction cards, but I think these Praxis ones are maybe the exception to the rule, which is good because that'll inform you during the draft. I think those are just a C. It's a fine playable. Hive Bomber is next. Beautiful premium I was able to pick up. 5-cost 3/1 Nomad 2. This is an uncommon. Summon, deal 4 damage to an enemy unit without flying. Oh my god. I mean, this is a 2-for-1. It attacks with 3 power in the air or defends as a 5/3, which does threaten stronger units. 4 damage to an enemy unit without flying. Sure, it doesn't deal with an evasive threat, but I mean, this will kill most units, period. This is really strong. I'm going to give Hive Bomber a B. It plays defense, plays offense, it does everything you want it to. Amazing. So now we're on to the Skycrag cards. We have a 2-cost 2/2 for Skycrag with flying, 2-cost 2/2 flyer. When it hits enemy player, you may devour 3 to kill an enemy attachment. This is fine. C+, 2-cost 2/2 flyer is very efficiently statted, and the upside of being able to kill any troublesome attachments, regardless of cost, unlike Strip for Parts here. C+, you're never going to cut it from a deck that can play it, but it's not super powerful in a way that would draw you into want to drafting Skycrag. If this did something like mill 3 cards from your opponent's deck, that would be a different story. Lash Out. So 3-cost for Skycrag. Fast spell. Common. Deal 4 damage to an enemy unit. Amazing. 3-cost 4 damage is fairly efficient. Fast spell speed is just amazing. You can blow out your opponents, get a good... This has huge 2-for-1 potential on it. It's a common, a strong draw into the faction. This is just a B. Super, super good removal spell here. Quillback Thrall. 3-cost 3/2 for Skycrag. It has Berserk, Devour 2, and Quick Draw. I think this is a fine effect. I would rather get something that doesn't necessarily put me into an aggressive lane. This kind of pigeonholes me into being an aggressive deck, which I'm not necessarily going to want to be in, especially if I'm like a more slower devour synergy deck. That being said, hard to argue with this 3-drop. It's just a lot of power on a card, so C+ for the Quillback Thrall. Once again, I don't think it gets cut from any Skycrag deck, but it's not really drawing you into that 2-color or 3-color faction. Thunderous Mishap. So you have an uncommon spell, 4 cost for Skycrag. I'm never passing this card. Deal 2 damage to an enemy recruit. This is probably like the best 4-cost recruit spell we've seen, since this is giving you tempo by killing an enemy unit and you still get the recruit benefits. B+, I mean, this is like always going to be a 2-for-1. Maybe my bias is this is like everything I want to do in draft, so I strongly could believe if B+ is too high, because 2 damage for 4, you are spending a lot, and by the time you're spending 4 and 5 cost spells, 2 damage won't kill that many equivalent units, but the recruit just makes this so good. B+. No less than B. Okay, Determination is our first Cambrai dual faction card. 1 cost, fast spell common. Give a unit +2/+2 this turn, you gain 2 life. Really efficient combat trick, triggers bolster, triggers your renown effects. C+, it kind of goes along with the same one. You aren't cutting this from a Cambrai deck, but I'm seeing this in the pack isn't like, oh, I can't wait to go Cambrai. Foraging Koaka, which I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. So 2 cost for Cambrai, 3/3, this is a common. You heard me right, 2 cost, 3/3. Bolster +2/+2 and Overwhelm this turn. This card's amazing. Now this is efficient enough, even if it's just a 2-drop. Even without the bolster, you're just happy with this. And combining this with cards like Determination, obviously make this stupid. What, it becomes a 7/7 with Overwhelm by playing Determination on it? So this is a B-. You just can't argue with this efficiency. This would draw me into Cambrai if I saw this into a pack. Standard Inspection. We have an uncommon spell, 3 cost for Cambrai. Play a sigil of your choice from your deck, gain 2 armor. I actually really like this spell. It fixes you, since you can choose to get the faction you're missing, which once again could either be Primal or Justice. No, Primal or Fire would be the 3 faction alliances you're pairing in Cambrai. And it can trigger your bolster. At the very minimum, even if you don't have bolster synergies, it's gaining you 2 health. I think this is another B-. Like, if I saw this into a pack, this would draw me into wanting to be Cambrai. Like, this would be a sign that Cambrai is open to me. B- for Standard Inspection. Aerial Guardian, and if you guys saw my last draft video, I got a lot of experience with this guy. 6 cost for Cambrai. It's an uncommon, 4/4 with Nomad 4. So it's a 4/4 flyer on your turn or an 8/8 on your turn. Now, my experiences with this is just impossible to get over in combat when you play this card. And 4/4 flyer in the air finishes off your opponents very quickly. You pair this with like siege provisions, giving it endurance so it can attack as a 6/6, block as an 8/8. Ridiculous. So does it just get flat out B? This just helps you stabilize in almost all scenarios. Yeah, Aerial Guardian, I'm just giving a straight up B. Argenport is next. A 2 cost common fast spell. Give one of your units +2 power. If it dies this turn, draw it from the void. It triggers Renown. You can use it even without the Renown synergies. You can target your unit your opponent's trying to kill with removal, just to cycle this by drawing the unit back from your void. I mean, this is great. Would this draw me into Argenport? I think this is a C+ in a vacuum. You would never cut this from a deck that can play it, but on its own, this wouldn't be like, oh my god, I need to be an Argentport. I don't know, maybe that's just wrong. And given the synergies in the set with Renown, I'm gonna go B-. I think if you work to get value out of this card, saving this when your unit's trading with your opponent's unit, or your opponent uses removal on your unit, or you have a really strong Renown trigger that you want to activate, you can engineer this card for very high value. So I'm going to go B- actually, on Against the Odds. Glory Seeker, a 2-cost 2/3 for Argentport. It's a common. Renown Lifesteal. Now I like that Renown effect because it is a permanent buff to this unit, and this also overlaps with the bolster mechanic. And even without all of that, the same thing as the Forging Quaka. 2-cost 2/3 is just solid stats. So this is the same as the last one. It's like right on the cusp of C plus B-, but I think there's enough good things to target this with that I'm just going to go B- for Glory Seeker. But you definitely need ways of triggering this, so that's with that deck building caveat. Reinforced Reaper, oh, that artwork's cool. So a 3-cost relic weapon for Argentport. It's +3/+1 versatile, summon given enemy unit -2 power permanently. And it can either trigger Renown, it can trigger Bolster if you use it as a relic weapon. It costs 3, which is really good for all of the Renown effects that trigger off of more expensive enablers. This does everything you want. This is just a straight up B for me. It's just removal in the most basic of scenarios, and giving something a debuff is relevant. I think it ends up being less power than a B in most scenarios, but it has so many different scenarios that it is really good in that it gets to the B level for me, if that makes sense. B for Reinforced Reaper. Okay, so we have an uncommon 4-cost Argentport for a 0/4 Endurance Unblockable Bolster +1 power. Getting just +1, I mean, that's not a clock. And sure, it can block at the same time, but I guess this pairs well with the Shadow Relic that when your unit hits the enemy player, you hunt one. You really want to trigger this twice to be happy. Yeah, I could envision Argentport decks where you don't even want this. So I'm going to give Warren Spy Mistress a C. I could envision decks where you don't want this. You really want to make sure you can enable it with Bolster or some type of relic weapon, in which case it's more like a C+. So that doesn't even like make it that much better. C- is my base evaluation for Warren Spy Mistress, and if you put in some work, this can function as like a C+. Okay, on to Feln. So you have a 2-cost uncommon spell. Give 2 of your units +1 power and quick draw this turn. When they hit the enemy player this turn, draw a card. So that can really turbo your Renown and helps you replace itself if at least one thing. Like, your opponent needs to be willing to chump to prevent you from drawing a card. That's really strong. Okay, I would give Information Warfare, with all of the Renown synergies, a straight up B-. This would draw me into Feln if I saw this in a pack. The thing to note, though, I would want to see that I have the good Renown cards first. That's almost universally my rule for Renown. I want to make sure I have the good Renown cards first before I go investing picks into this, and then I'm just using this on 2 units for no extra synergy. Which, I mean, it's still fine even in that case. A B- for Information Warfare. Let Loose. So 3-cost for Feln, common spell. 1 of your units hunts 3. This triggers your Renown, and it's Fueling Devour. This is like a synergy card, which is why I'm going to give it a B-. I wouldn't cut this from a Feln deck that could play it, just because an average Feln deck must have some amount of synergies that this can help with. I'm going to give Let Loose B-. This is a tough one to evaluate, but I think if I see this in a pack, that's drawing me to be in Feln. Rancher's Ruin. So a 3-cost, uncommon, 3/2 flyer. Devour 6, kill an enemy unit. Oh my god. This is great. Devour 6 is incredibly expensive, but even if you don't happen to have Devour 6, it's a 3-cost 3/2 flyer, which is just amazing. And the chance that this does get to kill a unit, I'm giving Rancher's Ruin a B. This bat is going to put in some serious work. Skullhaven Duo. This card, well, let me read it first. So 3-cost Feln, 1/4. It's a common, Renown +4 power. Becomes a 5/4. I actually think this card's really good. I discounted this early on, but it does block until you're able to enable it. You just need to enable this once to be an incredibly strong unit, and there's just so many cheap ways to enable this. Like, even if you just have Urge to Feed. In my Devour deck that had 2 or 3 Urge to Feeds, maybe a Tandem Strike, I would play this even though I'm not a Renown deck, just because I have many ways of targeting my unit, and then it's just outclassing all the other units in terms of strength. I'm going to give C+. C+ because I don't think you cut this from any Feln deck, but I don't think this draws me into Feln. This is something you're already settled into Feln and you're like, ooh, great. So now we're on to the 3 faction cards, so there's going to be a lot of power level here. We get Listia's Choice, so the choices are commonly an eternal a modal spell, meaning they have multiple different modes to them, and modal spells are almost always really strong. A card is better if there are more scenarios in which it's good. So Listia's Choice is a 3-cost for the Grove Alliance influence, so Fire Time and Primal. Uncommon fast spell, not sure if I repeated myself there, but deal 4 damage to an enemy unit. Already I could stop there and I'm like, great, removal. Or shuffle a Void of your choice into its owner's deck, then draw a card, meaning it's supposed to shuffle your Void in your deck, and it replaces itself, nullifying your opponent's Devour, or give one of your units +1/+1 in Aegis, which could trigger Renown, could save your unit from removal, win a combat, protect something with a weapon on it. I could go on and on. This is a straight up B, and this card's just always going to be amazing. Let's go straight up B+. There's just so many scenarios where this card is good. Queen's Guard Elite. So we get another uncommon 3-cost Fire Time Primal for a 3/2. Charge, Endurance, Nomad 2. This card is sick. What more can I say? This is a 3-cost 3/2 that's attacking with flying on the turn it comes into play, and because of Endurance and Nomad, it then gets to block as a 5/4. Just a stupidly overstated unit for turn 3, even turn 4. Need I say more? This is just like a stat monster. B+ for Queen's Guard Elite. This card's just stupid. So Caravan Draft Beast is the first one. So there's 1 Draft Beast for each of the 5 alliances, and they all share the same fate effect. So fate is when you draw this card, you play a stockpile. Now the stockpile is a relic that you can pay 2 and sack it to draw one of the sigils of the factions that the Draft Beast is a part of. So Caravan Draft Beast will get you one of the Hive Caravan sigils, Fire Time or Justice. And this is another way that the card developers have built-in ways of allowing you to draft consistent 3 or more faction decks in this draft format. Besides the fate effect, then they all just have some effect and stats to it. So Caravan Draft Beast is a 4/6 with charge. Den Draft Beast is a 6-cost 5/2 flyer. Grove Draft Beast is a 6/4 with Overwhelm. Warren Draft Beast is a 5/5 with Deadly. Skullhaven Draft Beast is a 6/3 with Aegis. So you see, they're all roughly the same. I will say Warren Draft Beast is my favorite of them thus far. 5/5 Deadly is just strong stats. It almost always eats 2 things in combat. Although, that being said, Caravan Draft Beast has also been really impressive just because 4/6 charge is impressive stats. Den Draft Beast and then Grove Draft Beast, Skullhaven Draft Beast are all like a tier below that. What's the common thread between them? They all have really low toughness, and if you're spending 6 power, you want your unit to have an impactful effect on the board. That being said, you would never cut any of these from your deck that could play it, and since these still fix for the dual factions, for example, Grove Draft Beast can be played in your Caravan deck, and then vice versa. I think these are just going to be really high picks. Thinking B-, like I think you see this in a pack and that's drawing you into those factions. And at minimum, it's likely helping you fix your mana, even if you aren't in all of those factions. So I'm going to go B- as a blanket on all of these, but do know that their power levels vary amongst themselves. Okay, the next alliance. So we're on to the Grove Alliance, which is Fire, Time, and Primal. So we have an uncommon fast spell, 3. You get +4, Phineas's Choice. So we have another modal card. You get +4 power this turn. Your units get +1/+1 permanent, or play a permafrost on an attacking enemy unit. So we see the main mode is going to most often be the removal mode in Limited. So you'll likely want to use this for the permafrost effect the majority of the time, but it can help give your whole team a buff if that is a meaningful impact on the board, and you'll likely barely ever play the +4 power. This is just a straight up B. I mean, that's really strong removal. You're always going to play it in those factions. It's going to draw you into want to being the Grove Alliance. Wildfire Keeper is our next card. It's an uncommon, 3-cost, 4/4 with Valor. So just a stupidly undercosted unit. We've seen like a 4-cost 4/4 and like a 5-cost 4/4 with Valor before, and this is 3. Now the idea is it's easier to be played by less expensive recruit spells if it costs 3. All that said, I mean, this is another really strong card. Probably a little less so than the... I mean, no, I need to give this a straight B. This is just so efficient. You're going to play this off of a recruit spell, and your opponent's just going to be like, concede. So B for Wildfire Keeper, just super, super good card. We get the Grove Draft Beast here, so we already covered those. On to the Hermit's Army, which is Fire, Primal, and Shadow. So we have a 2-cost, 1-Eyes Choice, fast spell. Kill an attachment on an enemy, or give one of your units Killer and Overwhelm. So we see the removal mode on this card, and then draw a non-hero unit from your void. It gets +2/+1. Now, unlike a lot of the other ones, you're actually going to use that mode more often than not. Most of these cards, you're just going to use the removal mode. This one is more often going to be like 5% kill an attachment, and then the other 50% might be the removal mode, and then the other 45% will be drawing a unit from your void and giving it +2/+1. Just getting back your best unit with a +2/+1 buff is huge. So this is just, I mean, this is just another B. Just a strong draw into those factions. Never cut this from your deck. It's going to be impactful every time. Malevolent Constrictor is the next card. So 3-cost, 3/4, uncommon, Overwhelm, Devour 3, deal 3 to the enemy player, and you gain 3 health. So it could trigger some bolster effects if you happen to have them. Mainly this is just a 3-cost 3/4 with Overwhelm, with some ability to deal 3, gain 3 to help you stay alive if you need that tempo. This is just a good card. I think it is efficiently costed enough that I would give this a B- again. Just 3-cost 3/4, it's great stats for that cost. And once again, there's a lot of recruit in Fire and Primal that can play this cheaper unit for free. So B- for Malevolent Constrictor. Den Draft Beast. Okay, now we are on what is this, Skullhaven? Fiera's Choice. Sorry if I butchered that. Another choice. This one costs 2, fast spell. Units in your hand get +1/+1. Give an enemy unit -3 power or deal 2 damage to the enemy player and you gain 2 life. So this is probably the weakest of the bunch. Likely you'll be using give an enemy unit -3 power and then you can trade in combat with this, but you can't just deal 2, gain 2 if you're really trying to trigger some strong bolster effects. Probably not going to be the main mode, but it is a relevant option. And because this being like that's like pretty weak form of removal, I'm going to need to give this one like a C+. I can't give it any worse than that. Like, you're never cutting this in a deck that can play it, but this wouldn't be like, oh my god, I need to play Skullhaven because I'm seeing her choice. Which is not the case for Mistral Spy, which is a 3-cost 3/3 uncommon, flying, deadly, lifesteal. This is kind of like the Queensguard Elite. It's just a stat beast with a bunch of keywords on it. Flying, deadly, lifesteal. I mean, this is just stupid. I think this just gets to B+. There's just going to be so many games where your opponent, if they don't have interaction for this, 3/3 is actually really hard to interact with in the air when lots of things just have 2 power. Deadly means maybe they need to throw a really strong flyer just to trade with it. And lifesteal means you're going to be gaining 3 a turn, which is huge tempo that your opponent's going to have to overcome if they're racing you. And it's continual activations of bolster. So B+ for Mistral Spy. This card's just stupid. Okay, Wandering Trader. So this is 3 cost for an uncommon. It's Justice, Primal, and Shadow now. For Wandering Trader, which is a 2/1 with Aegis, summon, play a 2/1 versatile weapon. So this is either removal, because you play it as a versatile weapon, which can trigger bolster, or it triggers Renown by playing the weapon on your unit. Now, it's also good to note that this plays the weapon for free, but the weapon costs 3, which does help trigger those scaling Renown effects that we've been talking throughout this whole set review, which is actually even more stupid now that I'm thinking about it. Baseline, it's a 3-cost 2/1 with Aegis that gives you a 2/1 relic weapon to kill a unit, so it's like removal. And they're just stupid case where you put this on a Renown payoff and get an extra bonus for free. Yeah, B- for Wandering Trader. This would be a pull. I'm even wondering if this is B level, now that I'm thinking about it more. You know what? I'm going to go straight up B for Wandering Trader. I think this does enough for 3 power that it warrants a B. It's a huge pull into those factions. Telia's Choice. So you have a 4-cost choice, fast spell. Give one of your units +2/+2. That's pretty... I would expect more than +2/+2 for 4. Oh, that's permanent though. So okay, that's pretty decent. Give one of your units +2/+2 permanent, or play a 5/5 Albatross with flying and stun it. Or the enemy player sacrifices 2 relics of their choice, which that's going to be the 5% one, and then the other 2 will be your main one. So you see, this isn't really removal. It can function as a combat trick. It can enable Renown, but it also, if the board is stable enough or you can afford to just play a 5/5 Albatross with flying, you'll want to save this card for your opponent's end phase. That way, they have one less turn of removing this before it readies again. So you wait for their end step, play this, make the Albatross, and then it immediately goes to your turn and it removes one of the stuns on it. So then it only needs to survive one of your opponent's turn before it comes back. I think this does enough between the +2/+2 permanent and the Albatross effect that I think B. I think straight B. Playing the Albatross can just be too slow, but a 5/5 flyer is just massive. Like, that's just so hard to deal with. Yeah, I'm gonna go straight up B for Telia's Choice. But notably, this one isn't really removal. and then Skullhaven Draft Beast. So we have reached the end of our Eternal Battle Line set review. I hope you guys enjoyed. Keep in mind, I want you guys to use this draft review as a starting point to evaluate the cards on your own. I don't know everything about the format. These are my best educated guesses on the power levels of these cards in the context of this format. But use these grades as a starting point to then form your own opinions. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope I'll catch you on the channel for more Eternal Battle Lines content. Peace.